Benjamin Coates, welcome to the studio. Welcome to the podcast. We've already met each other. We walked from Starbucks up to here, but formally, how are you?
Very well. Really very well, yeah.
So I asked you on the way up here, what was your motivation for saying yes to coming on? And you sort of alluded to it, but if I ask you again, what's the driver behind saying yes to coming on this?
Well, you had a friend of mine, Mark, on here, and one of the things you mentioned was that he's one of the more technical people that you've had. He will be still after this podcast, I'm sure. You said that you wanted to have more technical voices on here, and I figured, well, might as well throw my hat in the ring and help people to get maybe a little better idea of what goes on inside a developer's head when we talk about Agile and when we're working Agile. So yeah, that's my goal.
Brilliant. Looking forward to it. So I've taken this from your LinkedIn, so feel free to correct it. But hopefully it's not too far from the truth. But you're a Wirral-based software engineer with over 14 years of industry experience, spanning multiple companies. You've got experience in a range of roles from QA engineer to principal software engineer. And you're excited for the next challenge.
Yeah.
So what's been the journey so far? Going into as much or as little detail as you're comfortable with. What's the story, Benjamin?
Not standard, I'll probably say. Okay. I am one of the people you meet in the software industry who didn't have a computer science engineering background when they went into it. I actually started out with my software career having finished music college and looking for something to do, ended up going into testing games for Codemasters down in the Midlands. So I started off just as a QA engineer, which sounds great working in the games industry, as everybody who works in the games industry knows. The reality of it can be varying depending on what roles you're in, what place you end up working. But that was a great kind of springboard to the career. And from there, I ended up traveling up north to Manchester for various reasons. And that's where I ended up getting recruited into the e-commerce sector. They said, "You want to come and test some software over here?" And I said, yes. And from there, that's when I started learning to program. I hadn't got any real hobbyist experience with it until that point. But I had somebody who was very patient teaching me how to do the basics of programming. And we had a bespoke testing suite that we were maintaining, a framework of tests that we were building out. And slowly over time, started introducing more and more into this thing and learning how to do it.
And what language was that, just for
So that was using C# and .NET. That's the core of my tech stack. And there came the point where we were doing some interesting work with a lot of money-based calculations and things going on. And I came up with something to test, calculating tax on it. And it was more accurate than the actual implementation that had been developed for calculating international tax rates. So that was the first thing that I'd built when a developer said, "Do you mind if I borrow that?" and ended up sticking it into the code base. So from there, it slowly started with me introducing more and more pieces of actual functionality into the applications that we were working on. And I'd been rising up from that place from when it was a startup, when it was very small, where there are times I was the only tester in the entire organization in a room of developers who were sitting next to each other and back to back, to a company that went to about 60 employees in the engineering department by the time I'd left, I think. And going from QA engineer to principal software engineer.
It's a hell of a journey, that, isn't it?
That was a ramp up. Oh yeah, it was a very steep learning curve. Everybody I worked with who worked there will say that there's the kind of camaraderie that you get from a place which intense, and a lot of hard work, a lot of releasing software at 2:00 in the morning and things going wrong and figuring out why and stuff. But
so, what does a day in the life of a software engineer look like from your point of view? Keeping in mind there'll be people who of different levels of sort of experience.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So for me, I like to start early because one of the common complaints that developers have is they don't like being interrupted. So I like to start early because it gives me a good stint of time, which is just me with a problem trying to find a solution. And that problem can range from building something in code which needs to work a certain way with a number of constraints that you're trying to work on in those areas. Or it can be a problem where somebody said, as a business, we need to achieve something. And here is what we need the technology to do in order to deliver that, which can be, it can be anything from reducing cost, to coming up with some grand thing that does something very securely. So I will usually take a good hour or two in the morning, trying to make sure that I can work through complex problems, make notes, and figure out how to get around problems. After that is usually when you get stand-up meetings and things, or any kind of feedback to managers about what's going on and figuring out what needs doing in the upcoming day that you're going to be working. Mm-hmm. And then there's usually stuff off the back of that, which is either going to be helping somebody who needs helping with something, or it's going to be continuing building your own projects and scaffolding things out. And at this point in the day is when all the real collaboration happens. So this is when you're getting involved with other people's projects and talking to them about their implementations and informing your own decisions with the research other people have done, and writing tickets and reading tickets and getting statuses on things. And so that's the main body of the day. And then usually there comes a point to the end of the day, which is crucial, which is where you pick the last thing you're going to work on. And you need to find something which you're going to be able to hopefully find a good finishing point with. Yeah. Because one of the things is the reason why developers also don't like being interrupted, is because you're trying to build up this big stateful diagram in your head of all the interacting components and the things that you're working on and how they mesh together. And you want to make sure that you don't have to drop that at the end of the day and rebuild it again in your head when you start first thing in the morning.
Yeah. On that interruption point, and part of this is me learning as well, and getting free advice. Sometimes you work with teams, engineers, software engineers. And when I'll use the broad term team, that includes everyone, QA, DevOps, engineers. Sometimes I feel like there's a scale of, on the right-hand side, there's the team who just want to be left alone and they don't want any of that scaffolding that you discuss. And over here, there's micromanagement, command and control. But if one is working for a business, it's not a hobby, and the binary way of thinking about it would be you're there to do a job and you get paid for it and you get rewarded for that.
Yeah.
From an engineer's point of view, what is the middle ground of, okay, we want the creative freedom to code, to engineer stuff, to solve problems in a way that makes sense for the business and, more importantly, the customers. Leave us alone to do that. But there's the other side of it where, well, we still need to know what's going on. Like, from an engineer's point of view, what's the balance?
Yeah, so I think the balance is making sure you have people whose job it is to be interrupted. As somebody who's been up at principal engineer level, principal engineer's job is you come to me with interruptions. You break up my day. You say, I need this, and I'll figure out a way to resolve that problem for you. And at that point, it's just kind of part of the job territory. The terrible truth is that a lot of people go into software engineering hoping to work with computers, and they end up working with people. And it's not something that they are necessarily prepared for. Yeah. We enjoy what we do thoroughly, the majority of us, I'm sure. And there is an element in most professions, I think, where you just want to be able to get on and do it. But the problem is that I think the difference between just developing code and really being an engineer in software is that there's a whole bunch of additional processes that come around it that are not just sitting there and writing code. It's the design, the research that you have to do, the evaluating what tolerances this thing has to work in the same way as you do with any kind of structural engineering. The only difference is that software engineering is a much, much younger industry. We've been building bridges for thousands of years, but software hasn't existed for anything like as long. And firming up not only the roles that people have to fulfill in that, where people can be interrupted, and the methodologies which we use to actually achieve the goal are still very much being formed.
Yeah, I like that. I'm gonna remember that. Make it find people whose job it is to be interrupted.
Is that going to be the thumbnail piece? Is that?
I don't know. Maybe. I suppose they go hand in hand, really. So, as an engineer, what are your thoughts on Agile and the noise that comes with it?
The noise. So I think noise is one of those terms that means something very specific. We're here in a studio at the moment. We want information. We want clear audio and data, but we don't want noise. Noise is useless sound and information and interruption that comes along. And absolutely developers hate that. But there is a lot of noise that comes along, which is interpreted as noise, but which is useful information. The problem is one of context. So you might have a project manager coming over and saying, it's time to do a retro, and you may have a developer who thinks this retro is pointless and it's just noise. The real question to ask is why they think it's noise. Some retros really are, because they're people talking about problems they've been talking about for months and nothing gets fixed. If there's no action, then it's noise. If you're able to take that feedback and you're able to make meaningful changes in process and improve the way that people are able to make software, then it's not noise anymore. And I think some software developers have a view of Agile that it interferes a lot with their working day. And that's because they haven't had the value of what Agile does bring demonstrated to them. I'm not sure where the fault lies there, or if there is any, or if it's just that the software industry has worked in a way for so long, where you think classic waterfall, you think of people working hard on long stints and with a goal in the distance that's looming with a date attached to it. And any distraction that occurs during that time period is detrimental to the goal of reaching the end. Yeah. Apart from where, there's a crisis because something hasn't been accounted for and isn't on track. And the realities of waterfall finally kind of set in. But I think when it comes to what people refer to as noise when they encounter Agile, it's because it's a learned thing. They've been burned by having too many meetings in the past. They've been burned by people not taking feedback seriously. They've been burned by a company which is inflexible in its process and not capable of change. And I think those things are what people perceive as developers pushing back on noise.
If you go into a team, how would you introduce agility or agile ways of working?
Gosh, if I were to introduce it.
I think that's an important question because you from an engineering point of view, it would probably help those who are paid to introduce it and may have been developers a long time ago, but may not have the understanding of the environment today.
I think there's a few things there, and I could easily say something very contentious probably. A lot of people who make good managers, there are a few of them who were very valuable individual contributors as engineers, I think. There are some that knock it out of the park, and those people I think are exceptions. But I also think that some people who are in technical roles get promoted into management roles where they would introduce their methodologies and things in other companies where they've not had enough managerial training to really make that transition. It's a process of ending up in a role due to your good work, which you're not necessarily suited for. And personally, I don't really want to take on in my career any management responsibilities if I can. I don't want to be somebody's line manager. I don't want to be responsible for reviews or for having them give me bad news. Because I honestly think I would be a poor manager. I care very deeply about quality of software and the quality of service that end users getting. And the sad reality is I think I care about that more than I care about caring for the safety of the psychological safety of people who would work with me.
Very self-aware.
Yeah, people can tell me I can be a harsh taskmaster when I'm in charge of things, so I try not to be in charge.
Yeah, but people get managed upwards because that's the way the organization is structured, not necessarily because that's what they want to do.
True.
So not all, some engineers don't make good leaders or managers, but that's the only way. We're not, people don't seem to be rewarded for their skill set. They're rewarded for going up a level, which they may not want to go to. Like, there's no side level, like, just pay people, like, bring the, it's a, I don't know if it's a HR problem, but it's a systemic problem of, well, we don't necessarily need to go upwards and be managers or leaders.
Yeah.
Why can't we just go sideways? We'll stay at the same level, but be rewarded for the value we're providing.
Yeah, and I think there should be space for that. When somebody acquires domain knowledge of an industry, though they can be considered an expert, it's tempting to promote them into a role which is something like a business analyst or a product owner or something.
Hello folks, sorry to interrupt this video, but if you have got this far, it would really help if you did subscribe to the channel. Because it's face-to-face, it makes convincing people a lot easier to travel up all the way to Liverpool to record in this lovely studio. So, like I said, please subscribe and thanks for watching. Is it fair to say, is this a fair comparison, and please challenge this, of like a tradesperson? So, a plumber who has been doing it 20 years, he's not a management plumber. His rates have probably just gone up due to the experience he or she has, or they have. But they're being rewarded for their experience and skill set in plumbing, not necessarily for their leadership and management skills. I don't know where I'm clutching at straws with that, to be honest.
It's not quite comparable, but I think it can be seen that way. The real difference is I think you can only reach staff engineer and principal engineer levels, or senior engineers in some places. People have their own definitions of these levels. I think you can only reach those if you're an effective communicator. And so the communication is a transferable skill that absolutely works. If there's a need for somebody who is a communicator who oversees a group of people, and that is the label of manager, then that's one thing. But managerial responsibility, when you're actually somebody's line manager, comes with a whole bunch of extra baggage, which a person may not be suited to. Yeah. So the tradesperson thing is, I guess, to a layperson, it's generally a good analogy. Yeah. But the world of software is, you can have a tradesperson who just works independently, gets called out, comes and fix somebody's boiler on their own, then goes somewhere else. Yeah, whereas in the software industry, you have no choice but to work with other people unless you're a phenomenal one-man army who can build something on their own and has infinite time and budget to do that kind of thing.
And some people have that attitude, but within organizations I've found, and they hold on to all that knowledge, and they like being the hero that people go to and to save it all.
Yeah, that's a factor. Yeah, I've worked with a few people who are the people who know everything. I've worked with some who love to know everything, who love to be the hero, who come in, save the day, and for them being called at 9 p.m. on a Sunday evening is a privilege that they look forward to when something needs their attention. It's not for me. I know other people who have that knowledge and responsibility who cannot get away from it. Yeah. They try to impart the knowledge to other people in the business. They try to make sure that everybody has everything they need. But it is hard to get people out of the habit of coming to them for the answer instead of going and finding the answer the way they did.
Learned helplessness.
Yes, learned helplessness is a plague of the software industry. It starts in the education systems that we have, and teaches you that there is somebody who always has the answer. And Stack Overflow propagates this problem.
And what is that for people who don't know what that is?
So Stack Overflow is a website where people post questions about problems that they've got with their code, and other people offer answers. And in a lot of places, it's very useful, especially when you give people who say, here's the answer and here's why. But when people just say, here's the answer, that really is a problem, because it means that people are learning something, but they don't know why it's the right answer.
And do people get found out when they move into teams, if they've been sort of spoon-fed those answers to the problems, but not necessarily worked out themselves? Do they get caught out once they're in teams because they've acquired lots of knowledge, but they don't? It's like reading an encyclopedia. You don't really know why.
I mean, it's not really that you get caught out, because it's not. in and of itself, knowing the answer to the problem on paper is not a problem. It's the fact that it's a way of learning answers that seems to become ingrained. Okay. I have a friend who said something once. They said that videos are the APIs of documentation. So the easy way of accessing the information that you need by actually reading the docs and internalizing that and understanding it. Instead, you have videos on YouTube that post, here's how to do this and show you writing out code and stuff. And I think this is why the mindset of the people who are inquisitive and say, why is this working the way it works, who go beyond the surface level answer to try and understand it, those are the people who go very far because they're capable of finding answers that the other people in the teams around them may not necessarily have.
Okay. One topic you were keen on talking about is estimation. So the question is, do engineers really hate estimation?
And the answer that I have is no, but they're taught to hate it. Engineers are fine when there's a right answer to something and it's easy to understand and to internalize and to explain to other people. You get a lot of exercises when you're learning to program, things called code kata, which are walking through a set of fixed exercises in order to achieve a goal. And knowing how to do those things is valuable. You'll get asked questions that involve code katas a lot when you're doing technical interviews. You'll be presented with a problem and expected to develop the solution for it. But real-world problems aren't like that. Real-world problems are complex. They're multifaceted. They have a whole bunch of dependencies on other people, on other departments, on other areas of the same sector of the business that you work in. They have constraints that mean that things have to be done in a certain time. They have to be done with certain technologies in certain ways, with certain contracts in place that prevent you from using solutions that you may prefer. And when somebody is asked to give an estimate, they're often being told that the answer that they need to give is, when am I going to have this thing ready? And in a lot of times, asking that question and expecting an answer within the same 15-minute conversation is impossible. It's not something that you're going to know for certain 100% until the thing is built. And engineers know this, which is why engineers are famous for caveating heavily when they talk about what they're doing. Why some engineers inflate estimates because they're worried about giving a wrong answer. Because when they give a wrong answer, in some places they have their feet held to the fire and people say, you told me it was only going to take this long. And they're worried about disappointing the people around them. They're not comfortable communicating bad news, either for their own fault or for the fault of the person who manages them, not cultivating an environment that allows negative feedback. And the problem is that estimation doesn't give you when the thing's going to be done. Estimation gives you how likely is the thing going to be done by a specific date. And there's this terrible problem with communication. A lot of developers don't seem to understand that the processes of function point analysis or story pointing or t-shirt sizing, these whole things are to give a range of probabilities to the business. They're not to give dates. Businesses want to know what is the 50th percentile of likelihood, what is the 90th percentile likelihood of delivering this feature. They say if you told a business it is 50% likely that you'll get it delivered on date A, 70% likely you'll get it on date B, and 90% likely you'll get it on date C. Those are places where the business can then go ahead, they can operate and they can communicate to their stakeholders and they can say, look, it's likely it's going to be delivered on this date. It might be delivered slightly later on this date. And when developers are asked for an estimate, they end up thinking through the times when they've been working waterfall, when they've been working in environments that have been very, very high pressure, when something is wrong, when a date they've been given is no longer a date they can work to. And they've been burned by it very badly. It comes with professional burnout. It comes with issues that stress causes. I had a terrible situation once with a project that I was working on. I was working on it by myself. There were dates in there. It was a very high profile customer that I was working on. And at the same time, my wife and I were planning a holiday, and I would be going home from work and just collapsing face down on the bed when I got in. And my wife would say, can we talk about planning this part of the holiday? And I just couldn't do it. I didn't have the mental capacity to take on what was going on. There were so many warning signs that I didn't realize were indicators of what was coming. And I ended up having a complete mental breakdown while I was on this holiday. We were hundreds of miles from home in a foreign country in a rental car in the middle of nowhere. And I couldn't cope with the smallest problem that came up, and it caused me massive issues. But these are the things that holding people to estimates does. And when developers don't understand that the way that the business values this information is different to the way they think they do. The idea of the business needing a range of probabilities and saying how likely is it based on historical data is something that I don't think a lot of developers realize is going on when they're doing estimation. Either it's story points, which are seen as being devoid of any real meaning, which are just loose and fluffy and nobody really understands, or they are times which they're being asked to give, which they will be held to. So that's my long diatribe on developers and estimation.
No. And how do we fix it if you were in charge?
I think making sure that everybody understands why estimation is being done the way it's done is important. Understanding what the business actually needs and making sure that businesses understand that there will be times when things are late. The question is, how often is it acceptable to disappoint customers? And that's a question you also have to ask the developers as well. How acceptable do you think it is to disappoint your customers one time in 10, one time in 20? How are those relationships going to look? If the quality of the software is good, the quality of the service, the reliability of what's been built is good, then if one time out of 10, when a customer receives something and it's a few weeks late, they're not going to care. They're not going to bat an eyelid over that. If the relationship that you have with your customer is good enough to support 1 in 10, then you can work to 90% likely that we're going to deliver everything on time. And at that point, everything runs smoother. The software team know that there is an acceptable level of failure and nothing has to be 100% perfect. The software engineering team also realizes they have to hit that 90%. They have to deliver stuff relatively on time. They have to keep their customers happy. And it's a communication problem, I think. It's making sure that the parameters in which we operate are understood by all parties and the realities that we live in when we interact with other businesses and people. In some places, 90% isn't enough. You'll have people quoting 4 nines of uptime, for example, in terms of reliability of service, making sure that 99.9999% of the time your service is online and it's responsive and the requests that come in don't fail. And that's an important thing to be working towards. But it's a deliverable that takes a period of time to deliver. And if you can get to a point where you've got your contractual SLAs met, and maybe the time when you deliver a new feature is not exactly what somebody expected it will be, you'll be fine.
And what's your view on who should help the teams do that? Again, I'm trying to help people understand things from an engineering point of view during some of these conversations. So whether they call themselves a project manager or a scrum master, I'd be interested in hearing your thoughts on that particular accountability, delivery manager, who should be helping the team do that? Should it be the principal engineer? Because they probably know a bit more, they've got a bit more context about how things work. In your experience, who has been the best type of person to help the team? I'm not gonna say protect the team because they're all grown-ups, but help facilitate a positive environment for the team.
I think a lot of this stuff is top-down. I think executives set direction and they set the expectations of the people below them, who set the expectations of the people below them and below them and below them. And sometimes there's an attitude that exists in executive management which propagates its way down, which is, blame culture. Sometimes there's an expectation which is very holding people to account for things. And in some cases, it fosters an environment of safety and saying, we're here to make something great and I believe in you. And that works its way down as well. And because you'll be hiring people who match with that vision as it comes down. So I think the cultures like that, which are conducive for software engineers, usually are being established from the day that the company is founded, whoever is founding it. In terms of who is, I guess, responsible or best positioned to facilitate these kinds of changes in the team, it usually has to be somebody who is outside of the team itself. Somebody who has a way of establishing a close working relationship, who spends a lot of time with people in the management layers above a software engineering team. Because if you have a company you're coming into, which is going to be changing the way it works so that it tries to nurture the kind of environment where everybody understands the objective and is working towards it with a degree of happiness, you're going to be getting it in the neck from both the people who work under you and the people who work above you.
Yeah.
And that's, I'm not sure, something which is avoidable. The best people that I've met who wanted to change the way that software engineering looks for a software engineering team so that it allows them to both be creative and also to establish their own reliability have been people who come into the business and the first thing they do is listen. They listen to the problems that the software engineering team have. They don't necessarily act on it. They just listen. They get the groundwork. They listen to the issues that the executive management have with their confidence in delivering software, with the relationships they have with their customers. And they look at what agile processes they want to put in place, and they pick the right one first. That is the biggest and most crucial skill. There is no point in saying you're going to start doing daily releases and in your CI/CD pipeline, in delivering software out into the world and deploying it every single day, if you don't have any of the safeguards in order to make that happen.
Yeah.
And similarly, if you've got a team that doesn't feel like they can communicate bad news, there is no point having a retrospective. So I think the people who come in and assess properly, who really pay attention to what is going on, who look at the politics of what's going on. And sometimes that is a software engineer who does that. Sometimes you hire in a principal engineer and they kind of get an idea of which way the wind is blowing. And they have a frank conversation, maybe with somebody who works over in finance to say, so what's actually going on? What's the goal here? And they can work towards those objectives. But it's rare. It's rare that it's an engineer who ends up doing that. I think somebody who has been brought in with the expressed mandate to manage the software team has to be the one. They just have to be paying attention.
Thank you. Where can people start if they want to up their technical understanding, both from I've got a loose understanding to I don't even know. I'm non-technical. You know, when people go, I'm not technical.
Sure. So for all of my criticisms of going out and having places which just hand you the answers, I think if you're not technical, then a great place to start actually, and I'm sure I'm going to get some negative feedback on this somewhere, is actually going to Ask Programming on Reddit.
Okay.
Because I have had some of the best learning experiences with people that I've met on online forums where I've said, how does this work? Or I don't understand this, or why is this of value? And there's been some extremely helpful individual who's come along and has said, I can help you out with this. It's a bit of a longer conversation. Here's my personal email. Hit me up if you want to talk about this. Even recently, there was a post where somebody was explaining some piece of technology. And in the end of their post, which wasn't even addressing me, they said, feel free to ask if you have any questions. And I messaged this guy and we had a nice back and forth with this guy. He lives over in Australia, talking about this particular piece of tech and how it works and the right scenarios to use it in. And I think it's great. If you're not of a technical background, there are people there who are willing to be helpful, who will put it in layman's terms. You have to ignore the people who are just like, go and read a book. Because I'm guilty of potentially being that person at times as well. But if you're of a non-technical background, you can just say, I'm not of a technical background. I've got a dev team saying this, and I'm trying to understand it. And you will find somebody who's probably going to be willing to be helpful. If you're of a more technical nature, Reddit's not the place to get your advice. If you're asking, how do I make my application more performant? And they say, Control-Alt-Delete and go in and delete System32 and whatever. The troll responses, the ones that you're going to get back, and they're not helpful. But you have to, I think, get plugged into what people in the industry are doing if you're of a technical view already. So there are meetups which happen in all the big cities and some of the smaller towns as well, where people meet up and discuss programming and what's going on and how the industry is moving. Those are really valuable. You'll always learn something at those. I would encourage people to do their own personal projects, even if it's a nonsense personal project, because you'll learn something from it. I did a personal project which was absolutely stupid. No one was ever going to use it, but it was just an idea to play around with some technology. What the thing actually did wasn't important. How it was achieving it was the experiment.
You know I'm going to ask where it was now.
Oh, yeah.
Unless it's unbroadcastable.
No. It's perfectly broadcastable. It just makes me look like the idiot that I am. It exposes my love for the absolute absurdity. It was an application where you give it a file and say, I want to delete this file, and it uploads it to the cloud and deletes it there for you securely.
Got to be something in that. This time next year, Rodney.
I mean, it's been uploaded from your machine. It's still there on your machine. It just uploaded a copy of the file to the cloud and deleted it there. Yeah. So it's a deliberately stupid project.
What did you learn from doing that?
That was an experiment in microservice architecture, in at the time moving to Web API 2, in how to do the modern standard as it was at the time of server-to-server communications. A little bit of what's called WPF, Windows Presentation Foundation, I think it stands for. Please edit that out if it's wrong. Where I was just learning to do a little bit of UI work on desktop applications, making things look, I wouldn't say pretty because it was ugly as sin, but workable at least.
Is there anything else on your mind?
Oh, a little bit more on estimation, which we could talk about, is potentially controversial. It's the idea of productivity as it's measured in software teams. So there are a lot of analogies that are used a lot of the time when we're dealing with making a software engineering team perform better. And
what's the worst one you've heard?
Oh, slimming the athlete is one that I hate.
Slimming the athlete?
Slimming the athlete is basically trimming the fat, but they didn't want to say fat. Slimming the athlete is a phrase that I've heard where they try and make everything leaner. They try and make the thing less cumbersome in terms of process, and they try and accelerate delivery of projects by changing the processes to try and get rid of stuff that people don't value. And it's as much as anything a problem with the philosophical argument of the idea that you're actually interacting with an athlete. Athletes are the top, 2% maybe of people who perform in a particular industry. The likelihood that you're actually dealing with an athlete in software engineering is very low. You've got a lot of normal, average people who are not the Linus Torvalds of the programming world who go and build things on their own, which end up changing the industry. We're not, in a lot of cases, responsible for something which is going to revolutionize the way that the software industry works. We're people who work in making applications for businesses who are trying to fill out their niche. And in some places, sure, you're going to have somebody who's a rock star, who's going to be great, but that's not the whole team. And the idea that these are people who you have to squeeze every ounce of performance out of that you can, it just doesn't seem realistic in a lot of places. There's already a question about how we operate as human beings in these environments, where if we're pushing ourselves all the time, is that conducive to being happy as much as anything else.
Yeah. I don't really want to ask this question, but I feel like it's...
Go on.
It's going to be... Just because I don't want to ask it doesn't mean that it shouldn't be asked. When's AI going to take over mid-level engineers?
Oh, I've been asked this question so many times by people.
That's what I mean. It bores the shit out of me, to be honest. But
it's not even that it's boring for me. It's just it's the wrong question.
What's the right question?
The question is what is the ceiling that AI can achieve in its current form, really?
What's the ceiling that AI can achieve in its current form?
Well, some of the papers that have been published show that the rate at which it's progressing is already starting to taper off with machine learning and large language models. There is very clearly a ceiling that we're closer to than I think people thought they were. The actual rate of improvement in these things, as well as the capabilities that it has, is going to start tapering, I think. It may lay the foundation for something else which takes things further. But in its current form, what I'm seeing in the AI space is that people have found a new toy that does a thing, and it is capable of achieving that. Is it going to start running governments? No. Is it going to start replacing senior engineers in the roles that they're in? No. Partially because the big problem with AI is somebody still has to communicate the ideas of what they want the AI to build.
Yeah.
And there is always a barrier between the terminology that people use who are not technically minded and the people who are technically minded. There's a joke that goes around in programming circles, and I know I'm going to get groans in the comments for this, but
you overestimate how many people comment on this podcast, mate.
It goes that a man says to his wife, "I'm going to go out and buy some milk," and she says, "While you're out, buy eggs," and he never returns.
Right.
And it kind of makes a point, and this is a very Asimov style kind of philosophical point. If you ask it the wrong questions, you'll get the wrong answers. And the issue with AI is the barrier between asking questions and getting answers. So large language models, ChatGPT is great at understanding questions better and at producing answers which are relevant to those questions. But there is still a barrier that will exist there, which is not going to be something that we can get past in its current form. ChatGPT isn't going to replace all developers in the industry with code generation tools, nor is Copilot or anything else like that. But what it is doing is transforming the landscape of our society. A very famous person, whose name I will not mention, said that with every technological advancement comes a social experiment. And the people who are the subjects of that social experiment are non-consenting participants. The people who have made these AI tools and who have released them for use on the world are resulting in a social experiment that is what happens when these tools invade industries like legal consultation, like HR processes, like simple customer support queries and answering customer support questions. And I think there are areas of our society which are being heavily influenced by this. Is the AI taking over? No. But is it replacing people? Yes.
Good way to end. What's next for you? Where can people reach out if you want them to, if you invite them to? You don't have to. You can...
So I am around on LinkedIn. You won't see me posting terribly often, simply because I'm concerned about how my opinions can sometimes be interpreted. But I am more than welcome I'm more than welcoming for people to send me a message on LinkedIn if they have any questions, anything they want to discuss, that's fine. I do also have an email inbox, which is query@bgcoats.net, where people can reach out if they have any questions on anything, or if they want to talk more about any of the subjects we've had here, if they don't want to do anything on a public forum. Perfectly happy for people to contact me if they have questions.
Brilliant.
Or challenges to my way of thinking.
Thank you, Benjamin. And if you have enjoyed this video, somewhere on this screen, there, there will be a video that is recommended, and it's probably worth a watch. Nice one.